So welcome to our third Your Second 50 podcast. I'm super happy to have you back, Alan, with us. The topics we've discussed before, DNA testing and glutathione, very interesting topics, very trending. People actually are wondering about these topics all the time and more and more. And today we are going to discuss another topic of very high interest, especially for people nearing 50 or over 50. It's a topic of hormones. We hear a lot about hormones. Years ago, I would say maybe 15, 20 years ago, bioidentical hormones started to become, as a therapy, more and more popular. I would say, maybe 15 years ago or so. And correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it's earlier than that, I can't remember exactly. And since then, there's been a lot of controversies also around hormones and a lot of misinformations around it as well. And I have a very interesting anecdote. I'm trying to help my mother-in-law, Lorna, who is 86, and she is having some real issues with the health of her spine. She's losing height actually because she has some vertebrae that are basically collapsing.
You're right.
And she's been diagnosed, of course, with osteoporosis. And so she's really struggling with that. It's creating pain, it's creating issues with mobility for her. So one of the cast members in the film is Dr. Jeffrey Gross. He's a fantastic doctor with a lot of experience in stem cells, but he's also a neurosurgeon. And he's really a musculoskeletal expert. And I described the situation that Lorna was facing, and because I thought that maybe I could take her to Las Vegas and he could do some procedures on her. And first of all, he told me, 86 years old, no problem, I can help her. That was really encouraging.
That's very encouraging.
But then what he said next really surprised me. What he said next is the first thing we need to do is you need to get your mother-in-law to do a full hormone panel. We need to know where she stands when it comes to her hormones. And of course I said, yes, that's a great idea. At the same time, I was wondering what is the real connection? What's the direct connection between the hormones, hormone health, and the musculoskeletal system in the body? And that was interesting to me. So I think that's a good way to start our podcast, because it surprised me that would be the first thing he would say. Then he said, after that, we need to study the X-rays and the MRIs, and then we'll come up with a plan. But the first thing he mentioned was the hormones. So what do you think of that, Alan? What is your take on it?
First of all, I think he's a really, really wise physician to do that. And it's interesting. So when he said that to you, we need to do a hormone panel, what do you think that entails? Like, what do you think he's checking?
Well, he wants to check, I guess, various like estrogen levels, testosterone, progesterone, I mean, all the different, but I don't know anything more than that. He's trying to see probably if there is any deficiencies there that could impact bone health and contribute to the osteoporosis, which is such a big issue when people age. I mean, one of the biggest problems is fractures, right? I mean,
yes.
Hip fractures, a simple fall when you're in your 80s or 90s, even though you could be in good health otherwise, but a simple fall can basically ruin the rest of your life.
Yeah,
and
80% fatality rate.
I know, it's just tragic. So yes, it's interesting. So, but I don't really understand more of the connection.
Yeah, so that's really, so when people say that to me and they say I'm going to the doctor, or if I do their DNA and I say you need to get a hormone panel, I think most people, if they're male, they think testosterone. That's my most important hormone, right? The other thing, if they're female, they would think progesterone, estrogen. But there's 50 hormones in our human body. So when we're doing that hormone panel, and understand these hormones all work together. So there's one that I like people to check right off, as well in their hormone panel. That's insulin. And people would not say, oh, well, insulin is a hormone, but it actually is a hormone. And it's actually the most important hormone in our body. If we think about the tragedy of dysregulated insulin, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, it's huge, right? And we know
nobody talks about it as being a hormone and looked at it that way, really.
No, they don't talk about it as a hormone, but it is. And one of my concerns with these new drugs that are coming out, where we're interfering with GLP-1, interfering with the feedback mechanism in our body to regulate ghrelin and leptin, a couple of other hormones, one that tells us that we're full, one that tells us that we're hungry. And when we interfere with that, then we interfere with insulin. And insulin plays such an important role. It starts right at the beginning of the day. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just go through a day and sort of the interplay of our hormones.
And maybe before you do that, could you give us a definition? What does the word hormone mean?
Well, hormone is a substance that has a metabolic effect in some part of our physiology. So whether that's like in your mother-in-law's case, so osteopenia, osteoporosis, we're looking for calcitonin, we're looking for vitamin D. What's her level of vitamin D, which people don't also think as a hormone, but we have to activate. One of the reasons we want to get out in sunshine or UVB light if we can, or we have to supplement with vitamin D if we can't do that, is we need that transport mechanism for calcium in our body. So it's a main transportation mechanism. So they're always involved in making something in our body efficient and effective.
Work better.
In a physiological sense.
Okay.
Right?
So tell me about the day, a regular day. We get up in the morning. People make a lot of mistakes when they get up just with the food that they eat first sometimes, or even something that they drink first thing in the morning could spike insulin levels. So tell us about that.
Sure. So we have a hormone called melatonin. A lot of people are familiar with melatonin. It's the one that helps to put us to sleep. Doesn't necessarily keep us asleep, but it will put us to sleep. Then to wake up, we have a natural rise in cortisol, which cortisol is also associated with stress, but it's also the hormone that wakes us up. But every time our cortisol goes up, our insulin goes up with it. So when we're waking up, we have this preparation. Insulin gets prepared for food. And every time we eat food, no matter what kind of food, so there's people that are on carnivore diets or vegan diets or any kind of food that comes into our body, there's going to be some insulin response. It's just a natural response. So in the morning, our body's prepared. So if we're pretty predictable in our food choices, we get up in the morning, we have our orange juice, our cereal, we have these very sugar-laden type of foods. We better have insulin there. And some people, they really talk about the dangers of an insulin spike, but it's really important that we would have insulin spike to take care of that sugar that's coming into our body and make sure that that gets distributed through our body and hopefully used as energy. Now, the challenge with that is, and people don't realize, even when we fast, and we're trying to do some modulation of something with fasting, we still can't stop that early morning rise in insulin. It's going to be there. So if we don't eat something with food, now we have to, of course, get rid of that insulin through some mechanism. So that requires a conjugation metabolic process that we have to break that down and then remove that from our body. So hormones start. We can't wake up without them. We can't go to sleep without them. We can't regulate our energy without them. There's so much involved in hormone that we're just not aware of because we don't talk about them. And one of the reasons we don't talk about them is many of them we can't really modulate in a medical sense. So there's not a pill for every hormone we're missing, if I can put it that way. So we don't tend to talk about it. But really our pattern of eating, our pattern of exercise, our pattern of sleeping, these will all have an impact on when our hormone levels peak. So men, if we can just talk about men for a minute, our main hormone to be a man is testosterone.
Yeah. You should be taking that in the morning, right?
So testosterone should be highest in the morning,
Yeah.
right? So men tend to, I'm just going to use this word burn. It's not a really concise word, but we have our highest levels of testosterone in the morning. That's to get us through the day for our physical activity, do all the things that we need to do as a man. And when we come home at night, our testosterone levels are usually low. And how do we know when our testosterone level is low? Well, we lose interest in life and sort of in general. We don't have the same response to life that we would when our testosterone is high. And that's because we're trying to now start to rebuild our testosterone. And hopefully we'll get good sleep. But the way people's lives go now, and we're going to bed way later at night than we used to kind of go to bed with the sun. If the sun was down and the chores were done, we went to bed, right?
Yeah.
There was nothing else to do.
No, that's more like midnight.
Yeah, midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning. And then we're interrupting a primary time for hormone replacement therapy and to rebuild our testosterone. So if we are doing a hormone replacement for testosterone, we would actually do that in the morning, for sure. So then we cycle it daily, where women, of course, they have a monthly cycle for their estrogen progesterone, which is more critical. Their estrogen progesterone levels rise and then they fall, and they rise and they fall. And that's where hormone replacement therapy becomes really challenging, because predicting that cycle and interrupting that cycle. And one of the ways that people do that is early in life with females is birth control pills, where they're interrupting that hormone cycle. They don't want to get pregnant, so they interrupt that cycle, and not realizing that they're also interrupting their methylation genes. They're interrupting a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Birth control pills in particular use a lot of B vitamins, a lot of antioxidant vitamins. So we're actually affecting our immune ability when we're using those. And I'm not against using those at all, but we just need to be aware of the impact that we have when we're doing that. So we have all these hormones, and I want to spend a little time, if I can, just on the insulin part of this, because it's such a very concerning trend.
It's a huge issue.
Even
Even with kids today. I mean,
we're now diagnosing children at age 3 with type 2 diabetes.
that's insane.
Isn't that insane?
That's insane.
It's totally insane.
Yeah.
Right? So when I was growing up, and you growing up, did you have a friend that was a type 1 diabetic?
Never.
Never. I never had a friend that was a type 1
I didn't. It was very rare to see kids who were actually overweight. Very rare.
Correct. Yeah. Every once in a while you'd see,
but it's
one,
rare. It was
really
rare.
rare, and now we're seeing that so common. And so, what have we done to the hormone regulation pattern in these children through right from infancy, right? And one of the things that we notice is we're using a lot of sugary drinks. We're using a lot of things that are requiring insulin when they're very young, and they don't have the pancreatic capacity to actually then take that sugar and put it where it needs to be. So we really need a gigantic overall pattern interrupt in how we introduce foods to children when they're young. Kids generally don't like protein, but they need protein. It's not that they can't tolerate sugar, but they can't tolerate, right now, the average child is eating almost 200 pounds of sugar per year.
That's
200 pounds. I remember when I was a kid, and my mom, because we made all our food at home.
There are different types of sugars too.
Oh, there's so many different types, and things that turn into sugar that people even don't think about. Bread that, turns into starches are, immediately turned into sugars in our body. So even you might say, well, I'm not going to give my child Coke, but they eat all the pasta and bread and things that they want. And so we really have to have a pattern interrupt in what types of foods and when we're introducing them to our children. And for me, making sure that your children are getting protein early in their life and getting adapted to protein, because protein, once again, it's a building block of the human body, and every movement we make in everything we do is a protein, right? If you look at a list of the 50 hormones, you'll see beside it what protein they actually are either transported by, or they're affecting, or they're a protein, or the combination of that hormone is actually a protein or a peptide of some kind. So it's a combination of amino acids. So introducing protein to our kids, when we look at our diet, what we were introduced to is like we're given milk first, which is really high in sugar. If we're just getting bottled milk, that's very high in sugar and a difficult protein to digest, which is called casein. We get many reactions in kids. There's definite indications. I know vaccines, people are very concerned about vaccines, but actually milk, the casein in milk is very inflammatory. Many kids will react to that because they can't break it down. And so that also then causes another spike in insulin.
Well, I'd like to stop you for 1 second too about the milk issue. You're saying many kids will react to that. The problem is that sometimes they have issues that are developing that they cannot really directly associate with the milk consumption because they are kind of out of the box. For example, eczema or issues like that.
Yes.
And so they don't know they have these issues they're trying to deal with. At the same time, they're drinking milk and they don't associate the two. Whereas often there is a direct connection.
Absolutely. Because of this very difficult protein called casein, that's
inflammation.
It's inflammation. Yeah, and gut inflammation. So we already are disturbing their gut flora. So very, keeping kids constantly drinking. I mean, that used to be the thing when I was a kid. Everybody, drink your milk, have your milk mustache, and so on. And now we know that that's not necessarily.
Well, it doesn't. They've been telling us that milk is good for calcium. You need to drink milk for calcium. So if that's the case with all the promotion we've had around drinking milk, going back decades with the mustache, and the calcium supplements that have been flooding the stores, we should have a very low rate of osteoporosis, osteoarthritis issues. And what has happened? They have spiked these osteoporosis issues. They've increased.
Right.
So, and that's why we see so many fractures, bone fractures with elderly people. So there is a disconnect between what we have been told and what the reality is.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's the disconnect between vitamin D, right? Where if you go have your vitamin D checked right now, they're going to give you a number. The number is going to be somewhere between 75 and 250. That's a huge range.
Or less. It could be less.
If it's less, then you're in real trouble. But yes, if you're at 60, and it depends. If you're in the United States, they measure it slightly differently. So, but still, if you're in a low level of vitamin D, well, that's the transport mechanism for calcium, along with vitamin K. So, and K2 in particular, right? So you have to. Once again, here we're talking about hormones, and we're talking them as if they're a vitamin supplement, but in their activity in the body, they're acting as what a hormone does, which is a transport mechanism, a physiological, metabolical purpose to do something, which is to get calcium into our bones and keep it into our bones.
So, Alan, you were starting with the day, and you were talking about the morning. So what happens next? I think you also talk about what happens in the evening for men with testosterone. Needs to start rebuilding, basically, replenishing. Is there anything else that happens during the day?
Yeah, so on if we were living sort of like we used to live, and I'm going to say even as when I was a kid, so you wake up, your cortisol's up, you're ready to go, and you have some place to put that because we had a lot of physical activity when we were children. So that's one of the ways we control cortisol is through physical activity. But if we look at what we do now, so we wake up with cortisol, we have our insulin up, we have a breakfast that really, is sugar-based, mostly based, hardly any protein, and then we go to work. We don't have physical activity. We don't have any way to get rid of our cortisol. So now we have higher levels of cortisol through the day. And what does cortisol do? Well, cortisol puts us into a kind of a fight or flight mode.
It's a stress hormone.
Stress hormone, right? So
it takes us away from a state of homeostasis.
It totally, 100%, right? So without that physical activity. And I remember when I went to school as a child, my grades 1 to 6, we had phys ed first thing in the morning, right?
That's good.
Even if we didn't have a phys ed class, we always had an activity. We had to be to school at least 20 minutes early, and we would have a physical activity. And that was just nobody, I don't know if they knew what, but
It
they
was
knew.
instinctively maybe they did it, like without maybe.
Well, they knew it would settle the kids down. They didn't
yes.
know that what they were doing was actually modulating their cortisol level so they could settle down and actually stay in class. So now we have these elevated levels of cortisol. Once again, every time our cortisol is up, our insulin is up. And here's one of the big secrets about insulin. When your insulin is up, it blocks you using any other mechanism for creating energy. So it blocks burning fat. If you do have excess fat, you can't access that. You have a very difficult time even accessing any other energy mechanism as long as your insulin is up. So now we become insulin dependent. And we go through this cycle where, my insulin drops, so now I need more sugar. Because we get into hypoglycemia, so we get kind of depressed and out of energy and so on. I need some sugar. And we get in this terrible cycle, right? And the way to break that, of course, is to add in protein and some good fats into your diet and make sure, once again, you're getting your body into homeostasis. So any kind of physical activity, and I like to say to people, anything is better than nothing. So going to work and walking up the stairs, even if for a few floors, even if if you're on
That's
the 38th
huge.
floor,
maybe not.
But getting off somewhere or walking some stairs and then getting on the elevator, even just 5 minutes of physical activity is enough to start to modulate that cortisol. And if you're stressed through the day, instead of going for a snack, go for a walk, go outside, have some water, drink some water, get some sunlight, get some fresh air, and help modulate the cortisol levels. And with cortisol, there's other things that you can modulate. So we can really, through some simple lifestyle management, we can really help our hormones perform at their best. Also, that little activity will help preserve our testosterone as a man. So we're not going to run out of testosterone.
Testosterone is very interesting because if you're in your second 50, let's say you're in your 60s, and you get tested for testosterone, you get a number back and you show it to your MD, your physician, and likely he's going to say you're normal, your levels are normal, they're good. Fine, you're good.
Yeah, you're good.
The problem is when they say that, they mean you're good, your levels are normal for a 65-year-old man, if that's your age. But you really want the testosterone level of a 65-year-old man? Or don't you prefer the testosterone level of a 35-year-old man?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the question.
Yeah. So when I'm looking at people's DNA and I'm looking at their testosterone gene and understanding that, I would say a vast percentage, huge percentage of people have some dysregulation in the ability to regulate their testosterone or their estrogen, so males and females. And let's put it out there already that females have testosterone and they need a specific level. They should be having especially in their second 50, women should be having their testosterone checked once in a while. And there is a sort of a level that you want to maintain that at, and that's for bone health. That's another thing that they're going to check your mother-in-law for. What's her testosterone level? If it's like 0.5, and it should be 3, right? So they'll want to do something with that. But yes, when the ranges, these ranges are kind of frustrating in a sense. So testosterone in Canada, when we measure it, it's 8.5 to 30. Right? So if I go in, I'm 70 years old, I go in and my testosterone is 11, they're going to say, oh, well, as a 70-year-old, 11 is actually, it's okay. But it isn't okay, right? I would want to have a testosterone like 20, 22, 23, somewhere in there. So I can enjoy some of these activities. I can work out harder. I can maintain lean muscle mass. I know that my bones are going to be stronger.
Well, and sexual health too.
Your sex, yes, although testosterone is just one of the things that plays in sexual health, and creation of nitric oxide is maybe more important with sexual health. But definitely we want to have testosterone, right? Because it preserves us as a man. There's some really great studies now coming out. So when I first started investigating hormone health, testosterone therapy was frowned on. It was like, ooh, we're very concerned about prostate cancer.
I remember that.
Right?
Yes.
Benign prostate hypertrophy, challenges with your prostate. Well, we'll now know that men's prostate expands
it's kind of a natural process.
It's kind of a natural process. We don't want it to expand too much. It is going to expand somewhat.
I take lycopene.
Yes.
For that.
Lycopene and zinc.
Pollen, zinc.
Right? So it is going to expand a little bit, but let's hope it's not inconvenient. And we want to control that. And there may be some play, but actually low testosterone is more likely associated with benign prostate hypertrophy and prostate cancer than higher levels of prostate.
And that process, low testosterone, can happen earlier in life too for men.
Well, now when we're checking, so the youngest person I've had checked for testosterone is 28 years old. His testosterone level was 7.3. Remember, I said the range is 8.5 to 30. This person should be
There's different ways of measuring it. In the US, they use, I think, different, like 500 to 1,000 or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, so, and we could get those tables if somebody wanted, but I had him checked and I'm like, he's 28 years old. He's a farmer. He's outside. He's working. So then we do his genetics, and he has a very poor gene for regulating testosterone. So now we have to, okay, what can we do about that, right? Is there anything we can do for food? He's already exercising every day. He's out, throwing bales and doing...
Which is good for testosterone.
Great physical activity, but he needs more testosterone, right? So then we have to use hormone replacement therapy. And we can, of course, we can do that on a really individual basis. We could put it in a little capsule, put it under the skin,
Well, through compounding it's done. I use a cream.
Yes. Yeah,
some people use injections.
And there's various ways to do that. I've found the creams to be more effective long term than anything else. But but as a general rule, you mentioned being 50 and over and having in British Columbia, you have to actually beg your doctor if you're under 50
100%
to get your testosterone checked, which is unfortunate because we're seeing levels in younger people that we used to see.
Yeah, the doctor's going to push back, literally. Why would you need to get your testosterone checked?
Because we're seeing levels in ages of 30 and 40 that we used to see in ages of 60 and 70.
That's scary.
That's why. And we don't know why that is. Is that environmental toxins? Is just too much stress? Or is it the inactivity, the lifestyle that we live, where we're constantly under, lights that aren't normal to us and so on.
Stress, everything, as you mentioned.
Everything piles in. So insulin is a big one. Testosterone, estrogen, those are big ones. Thyroid, all right? So especially in women over 50, we have to look at the thyroid. Hashimoto's is another disease that's it's very, very prominent in women. It's more prominent. It's very rare that you have a man with Hashimoto's, but women. And one of the things they never connect, and it's even physicians that I talk to, they'll never connect the adrenal glands with the thyroid. But in my sort of experience, when I look at people's lifestyle and we're checking their thyroid because they're overweight or they're losing their hair or there's something going on there that's really related to thyroid, we never do check their adrenal function. And I think that's really important because when we actually overuse our adrenal glands, so people that are under a lot of stress, we're pumping out a lot of adrenaline and so on, which that impacts, when that starts to fail, our thyroid starts to try to make up for that. So now we're overusing our thyroid, we're overusing our pituitary gland, we're actually stressing all the other glands in the chain of energy production with that adrenal, a massive adrenal requirement. And if we look at those adrenal glands, I mean, they're barely the size of our thumb. They're very tiny little glands that are sitting in our body. So stressing them is very easy. So I always encourage people to first do adrenal support as your number one thing, and then we can look at thyroid. Maybe that will relieve the thyroid and certainly relieve some of the Hashimoto symptoms for sure. With all of the hormones, and maybe this is kind of where we should kind of wrap, because we could talk about this for hours, but they're all interrelated. So your vitamin D, all your oil soluble vitamins, so your vitamin D, your vitamin A, your ADE, right? Those are all, they're oil soluble. They do have interplay with other functions in your body. Vitamin A with your immune system. So maybe the hormone relationship isn't really clear with those, except with vitamin D. But I believe that there is some impact because they're oil soluble, because our hormones are oil soluble. They're fats, they're protein, they're lipoproteins. There has to be some interplay there. So one of the things I encourage people to do, and I know that you're really into this too, is really monitor your omega-3 fatty acids, your good fats, the fats that you need. So we need cholesterol. And I think
absolutely.
The mother of all hormones is cholesterol, right? If we're going to look at if we want to look at a big chart, where all these hormones and these 50 hormones, right up there is cholesterol. So that's one of my real contentions about the use of statin drugs and blocking the production of cholesterol in our liver is, what's the downstream effects of doing that on a long-term basis? And can we do something that we don't need to block that, dietarily, exercise, whatever, to keep our cholesterol intact? We need cholesterol for our brain function. So we look at older people over 50, and we look at cognitive decline.
Huge.
Is that a lack of cholesterol? Are they not eating the right fats in their diet?
But we've been demonizing cholesterol
incorrectly
for decades.
For decades, yes. And we need cholesterol.
And we are paying the price now.
We are paying a very, very big price for that. So one of the things I'd like to encourage people is, you need omega fatty acids. You need to intentionally facilitate a methodology for your body to produce it does produce its own cholesterol,
including that C15 essential fatty acid, which is a fairly new discovery that we will talk about on another podcast, because it's so important, such a big discovery.
I don't want people to be afraid of fat. There's really good fats. They should be in your diet. We need more of them as we get older, not less. We need more protein as we get older, not less.
Problem is, people associate eating fat with gaining weight. And again, it's a misconception, really.
100%.
It's not that simple.
Not that simple. 100%. The ingredient we can live without is sugar.
That's right.
We can live without. We can take protein and make sugar. The amino acid, the glycogen breaks down into sugar. 30,000 units of sugar. Glycogen stored in our liver. So glucagon, glycogen. There's a big connection between these things. We're never going to be out of sugar. Our body won't allow that. We can take protein. We can take fats. We can make our sugars. So we can do without the sugar load. That we don't need the 180 to 200 grams of sugar that we're eating every year of just pure sugars.
Of course not.
We don't. But we do need good fats. We do need good proteins. And when we have those good fats, then we're giving our body the basis to make good hormones. The other thing is, as much sunlight as you can, much fresh air. And there's no questioning that any kind of activity. So just want to go back to your mother-in-law for a moment. A few years ago, I was in on a clinical trial. We took women all over the age of 80 and up into their 90s who had osteopenia, osteoporosis. And we put them on an exercise program. So we had 3 groups. We had a control group, exercise program, and supplementation. Right. Control group, just exercise. Control group, just supplementation. Of course, another control group we didn't do anything with, right? Yes. your placebo, well, that's your control group. And so out of all of those, we did find a little bit of help through supplementation. But the biggest contributor to getting calcium back into our bones was actually exercise. And what I mean by exercise is we had them doing very, very light resistance exercise.
Yeah.
Resistance. So not cardiovascular, not running, not getting them out walking. We had them doing resistance exercise because, the big joints, so our hip joints, these big joints we have in our body where our stem cells are stored, we found if we put tension on those joints, that would stimulate not only stem cell production, but also stimulate the uptake of calcium. So supplementation was a little bit effective, but exercise was more effective, and then supplementation with exercise was together. And then at that time, we weren't doing anything with hormones, but certainly I'm very excited that the doctor is going to check our hormones first.
Well, it's actually a good way to kind of wrap it up. And I'm very anxious to see the results for my mother-in-law. And this could be a topic of discussion for a future podcast as well. So, Alan, again, very, very good information coming from you today. Thank you so much. After, what we learned about DNA testing and why it is so important for people to look into getting tested to see their DNA kind of map, gives them that foundation, that baseline that they can then have the power of having some control on how they age. And then the importance of glutathione, the master antioxidant in the body. And you have a fantastic supplement for that as a precursor. And now talking about hormones. So all of that together is extremely important information for people in their second 50, but not just for people in their second 50. We should be starting to look into these things way before we hit 50.
Way before we hit 50. Yes, if you can get I'm just going to say, when you're going to get your hormone panel, include your vitamin D. You want your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, but ask for everything that you can. Your thyroid, get a baseline on everything they will test for, and if the earlier you can do that and get your baseline, the better you can.
And sometimes and sometimes it means you have to push back a bit with your doctor.
Yeah,
because they might say, well, you don't need to test for that. You're only 40 or whatever it is.
Yeah, I said to my doctor, you're right, I don't need to, but I'd like to have a baseline because I hope to live a long and useful life. So if we have a baseline now, if I came in 20 years from now, you're going to say, I wish we would have known 20.
Oh, that is so important.
I wish we would have known 20 years ago.
Yes.
Well, I'm now there 20 years ago. So let's do it now. Just give me a baseline and let's work from that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alan.
You're welcome. My pleasure always.